Okay. Hello, dear authors and invited guests. Good afternoon to one and all present here. Welcome to the technical session 1B. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 6th International Conference on Sustainable Development through Zoom on behalf of ICT 4SD 2021 and Global Knowledge Research Foundation. We are thankful to everyone present to go along with us digitally in these unpredictable circumstances of COVID-19 and make this conference more productive. We wish everyone and their families very protected. We all will together pass this soon. We hope you will enjoy 2 days of this conference and knowledgeable and sessions. So just before we get started, I would like to introduce you all to the chair of this session, Dr. Pallavi Bhatnagar. Dr. Pallavi is a...
Yeah, Nilima, hi, thank you.
Dr. Pallavi, thank you so much, ma'am. Dr. Pallavi is a professor in Department of Electrical and Electronics in IES University, Bhopal, India. She has done research on LED drivers, which is an India-funded project, and also author of the book named Multi-Level Investors, Conventional and Emerging Topologies and Their Control. Thank you so much for sharing the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Nilima. A bit correction here. My research work is on photovoltaic and multi-level inverter. And this LED was one of my research funded project actually from CPRI Bangalore. And apart from that, I have a few more research projects I'm working on, like Indo-Poland DST project. I'm working again on multi-level inverter. And so this was a correction actually. So thank you for such a nice introduction. And I think we can start with the papers directly.
Yes, sir, sure. Sorry. Yes, ma'am. Now I would like to start with papers. Also, there is a special note for presenters. All the presenters will be given 8 minutes for the present and 2 minutes for the Q&A. On 7 minutes, I will raise a gentle reminder and a request to all other participants to be muted when the presentation is going on. Our first presentation is from Deepika Chandra Verma, and the paper title is Blockchain for Foolproof e-voting Systems. Hello, Ms. Deepika. You can start your presentations.
Hello. I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, yes.
Just hang on. So sorry about that. So, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Verma from JGBS, and I'm one of the co-authors of this paper, Blockchain for Foolproof e-voting Systems. Now, the motivation for our work is the fact that free and fair elections and holding them as free and fair elections is something which is very important. Not only because it all signifies the quality of democracy, but also in many instances, it also strengthens the sovereignty of a nation. Because if one follows the literature on inviting international observers to look at whether the elections have been free and fair, the chance to actually do so actually arises only when there are doubts about the electoral integrity. So what we have actually looked at is the extant literature. And what we believe is that given the advantages that blockchain has, because of its inherent features like immutability, transparency, and efficiency, blockchain-enabled e-voting systems are superior to other voting systems. Now, if we look at the extant literature on voting systems, paper ballot e-voting, which we are dividing into kiosk-based e-voting and web-based e-voting, all have issues of their own, which can theoretically be resolved by BEVs. Now, given that we are saying theoretically, what we are also going to do is compare the different types of voting systems, and then do a basic analysis which would actually tell us how we are concluding that enabled e-voting systems are good or bad versus the other systems. So in order to do that, we'll be using the extant literature to base our analysis on, because there is an absence of quantitative data to test our ideas. However, before I proceed to our analysis, I will quickly describe a blockchain e-voting system. And in order to do that, what we are doing in our paper is also borrowing from the representation of a blockchain-enabled e-voting system from the extant literature itself. Now, a blockchain-enabled e-voting system touches all the processes of voting, from registering and verifying voters and candidates to assigning them with unique pins, so that only the voter gets to cast their vote and no one else does. At the same time, they do not get to cast more than a single vote in case it's a system where every person is being assigned a single vote. Obviously, things can change depending upon if we are looking at different kinds of voting, but essentially that is the idea. Now, the vote can be cast and revised by the voter also in the system, because there can be a fixed time span which can be allotted to the voter to revise his or her opinion, after which it can be verified and added to the block where the data is going to reside, where one can see that the transfer of the vote has happened from the voter's side to the candidate in whose favor the vote was cast. As the system is immutable, it's not possible for anyone to manipulate the data and therefore the voting at the end of the day, which is one of the inherent advantages that BEVs would actually bring into the picture. Further, there is no need to actually physically transport the ballots, even if many a times that happens in kiosk-based e-voting, because this is in most instances going to happen remotely. And the voters and the votes can actually, because they are being accumulated in the block and then in the blockchain, the moment the last vote is going to get cast, one is going to understand who is the winner based on the counts. So that entire cumbersome process of counting the votes and the possible mistakes that can happen in doing so, as well as the manipulation, all of these possibilities are ruled out in a BEV system. Now, one of the other possible advantages is the transparency of BEVs. Now, depending upon what kind of blockchain setup actually goes initially into the idea of designing a BEV, it could be as transparent as one wants. So in a public ledger, ideally, it would be more transparent compared to something where a central administrator is running the system, possibly based on the demands of the local laws, as well as the possibility of the aggregate votes possibly also influencing other voters. Now, in our analysis, what we have done is we have mapped the features of each voting system to different voting processes, as you can see in the table. Now, the symbols show the level of efficiency, and so a cross is actually showing that that particular voting system is not efficient at all. A question mark in certain instances where we did not have enough information to conclude on the level of efficiency. So that question mark denotes that. A tick means that the system is very efficient in doing on a certain feature in the voting
Sorry
process.
to interrupt you, ma'am, but 1 last minute left for presentation.
So how many minutes do I have?
You have 8 minutes for presentation and 2 minutes for question and answer.
No. So do I have some time left?
just one last minute.
Okay, that's fine. So given this, in fact, the double ticks are for systems which are most efficient on certain features. So if we look at the total scores at the bottom row, what we have done is we have tallied these efficiencies for different features. What we concluded is BEV is more efficient compared to the other voting systems. However, a score of 7 on 11 is not a perfect score and also indicates that there are issues. As one can see that there are adoption issues, there are legitimacy issues, there are scalability and sustainability issues, and there are security related issues as well. Now, the point is how we are contributing to the literature. So what we have done is we have critically appraised the process of blockchain-enabled e-voting. And theoretically, BEV is most efficient, but because of data limitations and the fact that there are various possibilities in which this can be done, and one needs some quantitative data to test our theoretical conclusions. So our results definitely need to be taken with a pinch of salt. At the same time, what we actually think about is that the future work could possibly be based on the theoretical, where quantitatively and actually see what BEVs are actually contributing to, and whether they are indeed as superior as what our qualitative analysis shows. So thank you for your time. How do I unshare? Something has happened, I can't unshare.
Sorry, ma'am.
Somehow I can't, oh, okay. I need to press stop sharing.
Yes. Hello, ma'am. Dr. Pallavi.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
It was a nice presentation. I have two questions in my mind out of this presentation, actually. My first question is, can you please share with me and with others that what is the technology or the tool which is currently used in India for this machines? And second question is, is this just a review, or have you worked over any practical prototype of the implementation of this blockchain technology in case of ballot paper machine?
So actually, Dr. Pallavi, the thing is that we are a team of 5 and I am the economist in the story. So what our projects are actually doing is we are not into the technical side of things. So you would understand that I understand that whatever we are doing currently, except what is happening at IIT Madras's project that they are working on, the pilot project, nothing else has been on blockchain-enabled e-voting. So till date, what we are actually looking at is the kiosk-based electronic voting. That's the technology that we are using till date. Now, again, as I've already said, that from the technology side of things, because we are from the management background, so that has not happened from our side, and we are also not working on them, except for possibly 2 of my co-authors, which is Professor Srinivas and our final author, who is Ashraf. So possibly, had they been here, possibly they would have addressed your second question.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Deepika. And our next presentation is from Ms. Ekta Sarda, and the paper title is A Comparative Study of Local and Global Feature Detector and Descriptors for Image and Video Retrieval. Yes, ma'am. Hello. Yeah.
Ma'am, please tell me if my screen is visible.
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay, so a very good afternoon to everyone. Myself, Ekta Sada, and my co-authors are Dr. Jashu Jain ma'am and Rahul Nalwari sir. I am a research scholar student at Pacific Academy of Higher Education and Research, University of Udaipur, Department of Computer Engineering. My research topic is based on video plagiarism detection through global and local features. So today I'm here to present my research-based survey paper on paper ID 1414, a comparative study of local and global feature detector and descriptor for image and video retrievals. So these are my paper outlines for introduction, literature survey, problem statement, conclusion, and references. So as nowadays there is a large traffic for videos on video sharing and social media platform to increase the popularities of videos such as YouTube, Vimeo, Netflix, Facebook, etc. So it has led to the spread of near duplicate videos. So therefore, video plagiarism detection in the recent decades has been highly appreciated due to the rising awareness of video copy protections. So the days which videos can be downloaded and re-uploaded in another platform make it is very important to detect the duplicate videos to solve the problem arising due to the copyright violations. So it becomes necessary to identify the illicit versions of the original video being uploaded on these platforms. So my motive is to develop a solution for getting the video in a plagiarized. So after that, according to the INCR, that is the Indian National Crime Bureau, I found some strategies in recently 2020 that in the forgery recently we can found 8.6%, crime rate is 7.7%, and counterfeiting is 0.9%, and the cheating, that means we can say that some crimes are there and some forgeries, and all overall it will be considered 68.4 that. So after all we study all these strategies, we can find to minimize the crime rate. That means a plagiarism is a serious issue. Unethical activities must be detected to detect the copyright violations. Effective and efficient copy detection techniques, which is the most sustainable for criminal activities. And mostly it will also help to reduce the redundant data in the video files. So based on that, first of all, we studied that what is feature, then feature extraction. So feature is nothing but a piece of information which is relevant for solving the computational tasks that is related to a certain applications. And after features that we find that feature extraction. So feature extractions are methods that is based on spatial domain, temporal domain, and spatial and temporal domain. So spatial domain is nothing but the pixel representation of the image. So that is nothing but a spatial domain. That means operations are directly applied to the pixels, or the number of pixels can be reconstructed in the digital image. If we are talking about, if we are talking about temporal image, that means the series of images taken at a different time. And if we are spatial and temporal domain, that means it is a correlation that is used to extraction of features by non-negative matrix formations from each keyframe between the two adjacent subregions of the frame. So we can basically focus on the spatial domain. The spatial domain, it consists of two types. The first one is a global feature detector and descriptor, and local feature detector and descriptor. So first of all, we will discuss what is global feature. The global feature is nothing but it is describe the image as a whole to generalize the entire object, such as color, texture, shape, and just a detector and descriptor function. But if we are talking about the local feature is nothing but we describe the surrounding those points which the text, those points which identify the point of interest from the frames, such as edge, corners, block, text, and all. Means the local feature, that means it is used for object recognition or identification, that is finding out the point of interest in each of the frames. And these are the algorithms that we have studied in the feature extraction techniques based on the local feature, that is SIFT. SIFT is nothing but we call as the scale invariant transform feature, then speed up robust feature, then or binary robust feature, and so on. And similarly, we can also study in the global feature detection techniques the categories as PCA, or we can, as it is implemented on the whole image, and discrete Fourier transform, Veblen transform, and so on. And we have also studied the machine learning algorithm for KNN, SVM clustering, and deep learning for CNN, and so on. So based on these algorithms, we find out some literature survey. These survey papers, recently survey papers, and we have find out the advantages and limitations of these survey papers. These papers are studied and analyzed as a part of research survey for our project that will be beneficial for the concept and techniques from the researchers are used in the development of the system. So all these are the papers we have referred. So after finding the completion of my research, we list a few research gaps faced by the video copy detection system for the local as well as the global system. So I can find out some research gap going through various techniques which are used for plagiarism detection in the video. If we are talking about global feature, that it is difficult to detect the color picture of the frame because of the point of view loss, compression, resizing, rotation, etc. If we are talking global feature, then geometric transformation and coefficient. So the plagiarism detection in text and video.
Sorry to interrupt you, ma'am, but 1 last minute left for your presentation.
And plagiarism video is not implemented. So these are the objectives we have to find out, that review and analysis, development, detected, evaluate, and compare of my project. So the scope is basically we have to find out the lower processing time, computational power, and these are the features we have to find out in a one video. So this is my proposed system that we have to input query database. We process the data, and after processing the grayscale images and all, then we have to detect the feature extraction on the algorithm of local and global features, and then we can pretend the data for feature matching. If the greater value based on the threshold, that means the video is unique. If it is not unique, then we have to find out where the plagiarism is found on the global features, on the local features, and finally we can say that this video is a plagiarized video. So similarly, I will show you the one example. This is the video, multiple videos are there. So first of all, we can segregate that. And after segregation, we can apply the global feature, and then we can apply the local features. And after that, we can say that video is to be plagiarized. So we conclude over that this paper is totally provide the current images or the video detection methods with a detailed description, and many of the method is also available. We have studied the combination of a spatial domain, temporal domain, spatial and temporal domain. Based on the derived and many more techniques we also study, and we have to find out that we have take a unique solution. For that, we can identify that the video is to being plagiarized or not. So it will be a data recurrency will be improved, loss of comparison, resizing, and the processing will be, or efficiency will be improved in it. So, and these are the references and bibliography that we can use. Thank you.
Yes. I have one question over this. Actually, first of all, I would like to appreciate you for such a nice presentation. The PPT was very nice and the presentation was also very good. I have one question in my mind, that is this research is up to the literature review level, or some implementation or result part is also there?
No, ma'am, only survey paper is literature reviews in this.
Literature review part has been done.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's it. That was the only question that I wanted to ask you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ekta. Our next presentation is from Ms. Krishna Shah, and the paper title is An Optimistic Approach for Managing the Handover Latency by Using Dynamic Data in Software-Defined Networks, SDN.
My screen is visible?
Yes, it is.
So myself, Krishna Shah, and I'm basically a research student from the MIT WPU, Pune, and the co-author is Dr. Kishore Kulle. And my title is An Optimistic Approach for the Management of Handover Latency by Using Dynamic Data in Software-Defined Networks. So this is the whole agenda of my presentation. First of all, abstract introduction, objectives, literature survey, proposed work, experiments, results, conclusion, and references. So abstract of my research work is like assigning access point in a network with the help of the optimistic approach and by using Grady algorithm and with the help of fitness function in software-defined networks. Here is the introduction. So what is a software-defined networks? So software-defined networks is basically kind of a network architecture framework. By separating control and data planes, we can create that software-defined networks. So there is some features like for network architecture approach, directory programmable, agile, centrally managed. These are the features of software-defined networks. Here is some software-defined networks components like network devices. So network devices like data plane mainly consist of some access points like switches, routers, and mobile devices. Then another one is control plane. So basically in control plane, there is some operations is done with the help of some algorithms and protocols. Third one is southbound interface. So southbound interface is basically like lower level components communication, and northbound interface is like communicate with higher level components and the network operating system. So basically network operating system, it works like operating system of our computer. And the last one is application plane. So application plane is consist of applications of GUI. So next one is QoS parameter. So first parameters is like certain characteristics of data link connections as observed between the connection endpoints. So these are the some QoS parameters like throughput, latency, and bandwidth. So main introduction of my research work is like assigning AP in the software-defined networks with the help of optimized way is the main thing. And the handover term, handover is like process in telecommunication and mobile communication in which the connected cellular call is like a data session. So if we want to transfer one packet to it will transfer to a packet from source to destination. So within the mobile communication, how it done? So it is like handover. Now the term is latency. Latency is like measure of delay, and latency is usually measured in milliseconds. There is some objectives of my research. So first objective is comes from my literature survey. Third one is like how we implement our work in with the help of some Grady algorithm, and fourth one is to reduce latency using handover and dynamic data in software defined. Here is main motivation of my work, like intensified controls at higher speed and greater flexibility. Second one is customized network infrastructure, and third one is strong security. So I referred 25 papers for my implementation work basically. And the first one is fast decision algorithms for efficient access point assignment in SDN controlled wireless access networks, which is done by IEEE transaction and like authors. So this one is my base paper, and from that I capture some research gaps like how that access point assignment is done and how we manage that low handover latency term. Basically, author done access point assignment with the help of signal load and time. So in my proposed work, I used to done with what I done in my research work. So here is some different approaches for access point assignment, which are the for algorithms is useful for the access point assignment. And here is some protocols which is used for the routing like BGRP, PIGRP, and BGP. So basically in my research, I used to done work with BGP protocol, and here is some simulator list. So basically in my research work, I used to done whole things with the help of Mininet simulator, because Mininet simulator, with the help of Mininet simulator, we can create virtual network, and with the help of that tool, we can realize what the things are done in real time. Here is a proposed architecture. So whole things, access point assignment, its whole thing is done in the data layer, and that Grady algorithm part is done in the control layer, and all the resultant output is done on the application layer. So these are the main things how I divided my work in SDN 3 main layers. So here is some flow chart how the access assignment is done. So there is a number of servers, then the collection of data. After collection of data is processing processing is done. And the aggregation part, I did that small programming like greedy algorithm approach. And then after the communication is done, and then resultant request is done to the central server. So these are my proposed work system. Then I come to methodology part. So I used to done with that small creation of network with the help of small requirements. And I try to implement that 5G network with the help of handover scenario. And then I used to done the things and access point assignment to the my network with the help of Mininet Wi-Fi. So this is the data set which I refer for that 5G handover scenario, which is created by Rice University, and it consists of 834 access point assignments with the help of its covering area by that university too. So here is implementation snapshot. First of all, I'm creating network with the help of Mininet, and then I used to done that RTT observation. RTT observation is basically round trip time calculation. If packet goes to source to destination, then what time it takes to
Sorry to interrupt you, ma'am, but one last minute left for presentation.
Okay, sure. So these are the RTT observation. I compared with the Wirecheck tool and with the help of Mininet tool also. Then I come to create some multi-part topology for optimistic.
Yeah, can you, excuse me, can you please come to the result part? Conclusion part.
Yes, ma'am. So basically, it is a resultant table with the help of signal load and time. I'm going to RSSI signal time. So basically, authors in existing work, it is like 94 and 72, and I got minus 54 and 50 respectively access point assignments. So conclusion is like in the 5G network, I done that handover scenario, and I assigning that access point assignment with help of optimistic path. And I can see you that with help of this graph, if I want to calculate H1 to H3 or H1 to H6, so these are the calculation part with help of greedy algorithm and fitness functions. So it gives me shortest path with the help of a link latency and with the help of calculation. So it gives me optimal path with respect to all the paths. So these are the conclusion part and references.
Yeah, I have one question. Your work seems to be good. I mean, the results are good. Your research outcome is good. Do you have any publications out of these results?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, this publication is going to this conference also, and I use
like
some...
in like apart from conference, any other journal?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I survey paper is already published in Google Scholar Journal, and also with the help of that machine learning tool, I did some small modification in my research work. So it is like accepted by World of Science Journal.
Now, since you are already getting good results compared to the existing topologies or technology, now yes, have you planned or are you going to implement it practically somewhere?
Yes, ma'am. These are the snapshot which is I did it by my own. I already implemented this whole task by my own.
And is there any possibility to commercialize these outcomes?
Yes, ma'am. If we want to if we want to compare with that a real-time scenario, then it is possible to explore the things.
Okay, good. So keep it up with this kind of good work, and thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Neela ma'am, can we leave the meeting?
Sorry, who's this?
Ekta here, can we leave the meeting? There is an issue.
Ma'am, if it will be great if you attend the whole session.
Okay, okay.
And thank you so much, Ms. Krishna. It was a nice presentation. Our next presentation is from Mr. Vinay Raj, and the paper title is Integration of Attribute-Based Access Control in Microservice Architecture.
Yes. Yeah, good afternoon, all of you. I'm Vinay Raj, Assistant Professor from BBRIT Hyderabad College of Engineering, and today I'm going to present about my work which we have submitted to this conference, integration of attribute-based access control in microservices architecture. And my co-authors are Amandeep Singh and Dr. S. Ravichandra. Under his guidance, both of them have worked in this work. So I'll quickly go through the contribution of the work which we are going to present here now. So I'm going to talk about the introduction, literature survey, motivation, problem statement, what was there before and what we have done and what is the benefit of doing this, and we will show you the results and the future work. So before going to this actual work, we have to understand about microservices. Microservices is a new architectural style which has emerged recently, and the whole industry, IT industry, is moving towards microservices because of its wide benefits it is having over the existing service-oriented architecture, based applications. So there has been so much of research work done or is being done now in migration of SOA applications to microservices. This microservices is very new, and the research is also in very new state. So personally, I alone have worked on migrating these SOA-based applications to microservices. Part of our research work, we have studied about the security issues related to microservices. So there are many challenges in microservices. So since microservices definition states that every service in that application should perform only one task. When I'm doing only one task of in the application, there will be multiple microservices. I will have hundreds and thousands of microservices. For example, in Amazon, they have around 20,000 plus microservices. So when the number of services are more, the communication between the services also is very high, and there are many challenges. There is a scope for more number of challenges, which include some of them include security challenges. Specifically, we are focusing on, there are many challenges. In this work, we are specifically focusing on security issues. Okay, so in security, so if I go and talk about, these are the few issues which we face during communication between multiple microservices. So there are container issues, data container, in the sense we are using in microservices architecture uses containers for deploying the applications, cloud containers. So there are many issues in that. Again, we have data issues, permission issues, and network issues. So we are going to address about the data issues related to communication between multiple microservices. So earlier, this microservices is nothing but a successor of a SOA application. So this is a slightly modified version of SOA. In the existing literature, what we have studied, we found out that in SOA, only this model, a role-based access control RBAC model, is used in both SOA as well as microservices. However, this role-based access control RBAC has so many disadvantages in it. Major issues in this RBAC are role explosion and segregation of duty. So to address these two issues, what we have done is, in microservice architecture, instead of using this role-based access control mechanism, we proposed a new mechanism where we will be using this attribute-based access control mechanism. We are using, instead of RBAC, we are using ABAC mechanism. So this is the overview of the work what we have done. So we have studied about the architecture of the microservice application. We studied the security model of the architecture. Instead of RBAC, we have included ABAC model, which adds more security and overcomes few challenges which are there in the existing security architecture of microservices. So this is the introduction about the work. Now, if I go into detail, so to know about what is this attribute-based access control, ABAC, it is one kind of a policy model which we apply on the application or the architecture. So in that we have multiple parameters: subject attributes, resource attributes, and environment attributes. So these three are the major important attributes which are included in this ABAC, which help in providing security and overcoming these two disadvantages like roll explosion and segregation of duty, right? So this is all the literature work which has been done, who all have used ABAC, who all have used RBAC, and what problems they have overcome, which this model they have used, RBAC or IBAC, and somebody has proposed IBAC. So this all talks about the existing literature work. Most of the work, if you see in SOA, they have used RBAC, then they have overcome the RBAC using ABAC, which we have used here. Whereas in microservice architecture, till now the current literature is only using RBAC. So we are trying to include ABAC model in our this SOA microservice application. So all this is the literature work which has been done with the papers which we have studied to come to this work. Now, what is the motivation here? Why are we actually using ABAC here? So since it is one general motivation is, since microservice is widely distributed, there is more scope for attack. There can be more chance of security issues are high because number of services are more, the communication between the services are more. So that is one chance here. So microservice architecture should verify the authenticity of every service, which is most difficult thing to do. So therefore, there is a need for careful delegation of access rights to limit attackers for damaging the system. Now, what is the problem statement? So we talked about this. I said earlier that microservices currently uses RBAC. So it suffers from these two major problems, role explosion and segregation of duty. To overcome this, we are trying to provide an attribute-based access control. So what are the three attributes we already discussed here? So the three attributes are subject attributes, resource attributes, and environment attributes. So considering these three attributes, we are trying to change or update the existing architecture of microservices, which uses RBAC, which is now we are overcoming it with the help of ABAC, that is attribute-based access control. So we measure the performance. Also, we did this. We have, after including this architecture, we have measured the performance of the architecture, and we have seen the response time, throughput, and data transferred. Since we are worried only about the data issues, so we are dealing with these three parameters. We are measuring these three parameters in our work. So this is the, so now how do we include that ABAC in our existing architecture? We propose two methodologies.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir, but one last minute left for presentation.
Okay, I'll quickly go through that. So we have this is one method we have proposed here, where we have included this PAP, PDP, and PIP in our mechanism here. And second, we have proposed in this, we have used only PAP as an external here, which we added here as an external thing. These are the two proposed methodologies which we have proposed to overcome that issues. So this is the experimental setup, and these are the results of response times, throughput, and data transferred. And it has been observed that the results are better when compared to the existing RBAC model. So this is our work, and to conclude the session, to solve the problem of RBAC, we have proposed a ABAC model for microservices. These are the so future work. What we can do is here we can include the concept of firewall to so that we can implement firewall to add more security, and also we can do this. These are the references, and yes, I'm done.
Yes, thank you, Vinay, for such a nice presentation. Unfortunately, I don't have any question for you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Our next presentation is from Ms. S. Gautami, and but I guess she is not in this session. So moving ahead with our next presentation. Presentation is from paper title is Big Data Analytics for, hello, can you hear me? And the paper title is Leveraging Big Data Analytics for Predictive Policing in India.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. Am I supposed to share my paper?
You can share your PPT.
Actually, I didn't know I was supposed to make a PPT.
Okay, so whatever you're, sorry?
I don't have a PPT ready, but I have my paper with me. I can share my paper and then explain it. Is that fine?
Fine, sure. So kindly complete the presentation with your paper in the given time. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Just give me 2 seconds, I'll share my paper. Hello, is my paper visible now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Good evening, everyone present over here. I, under the guidance of Dr. Satyam and Sharda sir, will be discussing about the topic leveraging big data analytics for predictive policing in India. So I'll first start by discussing the abstract, which you can see on the screen. Okay. Yeah. So to commence with what we have outlined the statistics relating to India that mentions the criminal offenses across the country for the year 2019. So approximately 51 lakh cases were recorded across the country in the year 2019. And this was the latest updated statistics available online on the government portal. So with this number, we can say that the police forces cannot deal with the crime on a case-by-case basis. So with the increasing numbers, it's apparent that the safety is a major concern for every civilian, and hence the police forces need some sort of advanced techniques like criminal crime pattern recognition and hotspot analysis. So in this paper, we have used advanced techniques that can be implemented with the help of big data and ML algorithms, which would simplify their work and make the case solving easier and in a fast track manner. So moving on to introduction, to begin with, let us first understand what police prediction is and how it works. So predictive policing is a technique which uses computer systems to analyze large sets of data, including historical crime data, to help decide where to deploy the police or to identify the individuals who are supposedly more likely to commit or be a victim of a crime. So, moving on further with the current state of predictive policing in India, if we talk about the current state of predictive policing, steps are being taken by various states to adopt the predictive policing methodology, but there have been various kinds of hurdles in order to achieve that goal. In spite of the fact that there appears to be plans in place to implement predictive policing, certain steps need to be taken in India, such as digitizing the data collection and also connecting law enforcement agencies. So this was the major limitation that we found while reading the research papers available online. And we all know how COVID has changed the world today as we perceive it. So as a result, this change can alter the crime patterns or criminal behavior as we know it. And there has also been a shortage of manpower within the country, in addition to all the work and maintenance of the ongoing pandemic problems, and a delay in dealing with the crimes that occur within the country. So, moving on to data preparation. Okay, so data preparation has been divided into 3 sections. So I'll be talking about section A first. Yeah. So in section A, we talk about the data collection and what could be the different types of data that can be collected in order to make that analysis more apt. Apart from the usual police data, we also discuss environmental data such as crime seasonal patterns, the community composition, call data logs, and other cell phone data for analysis. And we could also combine data from a variety of sources, including legacy electronic data, data from the current registers, papers, case files, images and pictures inside the case files, FIR, charge sheet, etc. So in order to showcase how our model would really work, we have used a dummy data set. So you can see the dummy data set here. There is a snapshot of it. So here we have the report number, the date, the occur time, the location of the crime occurrence, the shift occurrence, the ward of the state, the district, the crime reports, the state, longitude, latitude, etc., and the crime category. So here I have mentioned all the details. So in the next section, we are talking about utilizing the big data concepts. So we first talk about the data pre-processing, where the data set can be converted into a CSV file that can be loaded into a structured database using the MySQL query browser. And the next step in this process can be the data migration module from scoop, where we can fetch a specific column or fetch the data set that meets a specific condition. That can be handled by scoop tool, scoop tool. Am I audible?
Yes,
Hello?
yes, you are.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So then we move on to the data analytic module with Hive. So by using Hive, we can create tables, joins, partitions, and buckets. Then we wrap up with MapReduce. As you can see here, this is the MapReduce module. So then we wrap up with MapReduce, where we can pass input data into a mapping function to return output values. For example, to count occurrences of each crime from input splits and convert it into a list of crime and total from input splits. And yes, so I've explained the data migration with Scoop tool, the data analysis in Hive, partitioning and bucketing. I'll explain it right now. So partitioning is a technique in Hive to partition the type of crime column and basically to analyze it. And bucketing in Hive that means clustering the data set based on area. So I'll quickly wrap up because we don't have enough time. Moving on to the methodology. So according to predictive policing methodology, crime does not spread along the same lines from individual to individual.
Sorry to interrupt, but one last minute left for presentation.
Okay. Okay. So I'll quickly explain the methodology. Okay. So we have scored every neighborhood of our dummy data set based on its crime rate for every day. So basically our plan here is to aggregate a score which would consider the severity of the crimes taking place in different suburbs in order to label them as hotspots. So in addition, our predictor feature will help us determine crime level across time and neighborhoods. With help of the crime score as well as the features of the system, we can come very close to helping the law enforcement determine how crime is distributed throughout an area and for a specific day. So the collected information can be categorized into different categories, with lower categories receiving a lower weight. And consequently, each categorical area can be scored on a 1 into multiplier with increments of 10 into weights and so forth. So in order to illustrate this implementation, I would like to demonstrate our implementation. Here we can see. So for hotspot analysis, so here we can see the insights that we have gathered, basically which displays the crime hotspots. For example, here we can see in Mumbai the longitude and the latitude of the area, as well as how severe the crimes have occurred over there. So we can also do geospatial visualizations of hotspot areas based on the algorithm, based on the ML algorithms that we have used. So next, this is another visualization that we can see, that is it on the basis of longitude and latitude, as well as the ward and the crime reports, basically what kind of crimes occurred. So we can also identify clusters. For example, in this area, we can see a cluster forming of crimes. And here it is heading.
Sorry, you have already exceeded the time limit, so kindly come to the.
Yes. So in the latter half of the paper, we have discussed the benefits of using this and also some drawbacks which can be which we can face, which the law enforcement can face. So coming to the conclusion, so in order to resolve the increasing complex crimes on a day-to-day basis, a comprehensive decision support system is essential for the conversion of raw data into a comprehensive big data analytics system. As a society continues to evolve through increasing numbers of people and the level of crime, which is increasing at an alarming rate, identifying trends requires an increase in large scale crime data sets. So in our paper, we have implemented a solution on a sample data set, which can be used to develop strategies to predict hotspot areas with prime crime locations. And furthermore, we have also documented on how to develop strategies for predicting crime hotspots and identification of clusters based on our sample data set. And further, we have also mentioned future scope. That's it. I'm sorry that I had to go beyond the limited time that we were allotted. Any questions on this?
Yeah, I don't have any question, but your work is very, latest and good, and outcomes are also good. But I have a suggestion for you that in case of in any conference or this thing, you have to prepare PPTs by next time, right?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Actually, this is my first conference, so I wasn't
aware. I understood that. Yes, yes. So your topic is good. Paper is also good. Outcomes are good. That's all.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shika. And our next presentation is from Ms. Babita Tham. Paper title is Impact of Data Mining on HCC Prediction Survey. Hello, Ms. Babita.
Okay, ma'am. 1 minute.
Yeah, sure.
And can you see the screen, ma'am?
Yes.
The slide?
But it is a web page, not your presentation.
Okay, sorry, ma'am. 1 minute. One minute, ma'am. There is some issue.
May I know which kind of facing?
Actually, I couldn't get my desktop. Actually, I don't know why.
Okay. Just restart the.
No. You just Kavita, you just open your PPT in the background on the screen, and then click on this share screen button.
Yeah, I have done it, ma'am, but I actually don't know what happened.
Just
is it visible now?
Restart sharing. No, it is still web pages showing on.
Okay, ma'am. Got it, ma'am. Now it's okay?
Just open your PPT.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, is it okay, ma'am, now?
Yes, okay now.
Okay, sorry for the delay, ma'am. Okay. My name is Babita Thambi. My co-author is Dr. Srija. And my topic is impact of data mining on HCC prediction. Actually, it is a survey paper based on the HCC, that means hepatocellular carcinoma. It is a type of liver cancer. Okay. In recent years in health sector, data mining became an ease of use for disease prediction. Data mining is a process of dredge up information from massive data set or warehouse or other repositories. It is a very challenging task for the researchers to predict such a type of diseases because huge amount of data is there in the medical field. To overcome the issue, researchers have adopted the data mining methods because it was a strong adapter because it is using such as classification methods, regression methods, clustering, association rules, and so on. The objective of this survey paper is to compare different ML algorithms, how they are predicting such diseases. And the reason behind this is that over 50 million of people around the world is suffering from HCC now. And come to hepatocellular carcinoma. As we all know, liver is our largest internal organ, doing the job of breaking down and detoxification of substances in the body. And it is doing the bloodstream refinement, and it is coming to the digestive tract and playing major role in the metabolism and serving vital functions like decomposition of red blood cells and all. Various type of liver diseases are there, including viral infections. Normally, we are seeing hepatitis A, B, C infection, or immune-related infection, alcoholic diseases, non-alcoholic fatty liver diseases, NASH, and some type of tumors and cancers. And among all these type of liver cancers, hepatocellular carcinoma is the primary liver cancer, mainly affecting not only the Indians, but all around the world. These are the stages of liver disease. You can see the healthy liver as a first image. And the fat is secreted and it is causing fatty liver. As all of you know, most of them are affected with fatty liver now. But the case is often ignored nowadays. The fatty liver is sometimes ignored, especially in this time of COVID. We are not going outside for walking and nothing doing. And due to our lifestyle, fatty liver is increasing. And after the fatty liver, inflammation and scarring goes to this particular liver, and it will lead to liver fibrosis. And the scarring tissue will become replaced by the normal liver tissues, and finally it is goes into cirrhosis. After cirrhosis, most of the patients are showing the symptoms of tumor developing. The tumor developing, almost all of the cases of tumors are ended up with the liver cancer. Our liver cancer is primarily HCC. And there are two methods of diagnosis for HCC, invasive and non-invasive methods. In invasive methods, we are using some painful and risky procedures like biopsy, laparoscopy, endoscopy, HPPG. HPPG is a pressure giving to the portal vein. And in non-invasive procedures that are not painful, and we are using imaging techniques like our scanning methods, liver stiffness, serum markers, etc. Okay, what are the issues and challenges regarding this particular study? Both males and females are victims of a NAFLD, means a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. My study was mainly prominent and mainly focused on the NAFLD patients. It is more affecting the males who are above the age of 60. And the reason is variable morphology is that means variable morphology means the type of tumor is different from person to person. Okay. Then poor diagnosis. The diagnosis is very much difficult because most of the patients are detecting the HCC only at the later stage, because there are no symptoms or less symptoms for this particular disease until the final stage. Invasive procedures with inefficient samples. Invasive procedures are very much risky, and suppose the patient is very much aged, or if it is a child, then taking the invasive procedures is very much difficult, because a gun shooting like procedure to take the biopsy or the sample from the liver. And the later diagnosis, economical burden for the family. So we need a more prediction accuracy in early stage. And what are the prediction analytics we are using? Non-invasive biological markers were expanded and explored to assess the fibrosis phase of NAFLD patients. As we all know, machine learning is a multidisciplinary field to implement computer algorithms. We do it either by probabilistic models or by the static model, and applying the clinical data. Normally, algorithms are applied on the data like radiological imaging, liver pathology, EHR, electronic health records, serum findings, that means blood findings. Okay, what we are getting from the blood samples of the patient or from wearable sensors. And what are the biomarkers and attributes for early detection and analysis? There's some normal serum or blood biomarkers we are using are AFP, alpha-fetoprotein. AFP is a particular protein. It is founded 14 years ago, and still we are using that particular AFP as a strong biomarker. AFP-L3 is another isotope of AFP. DCP, DES gamma, AFU, and some microRNA markers are also there. Okay, in this methodology, we are applying a data set we are collecting and pre-processing the data, feature selection, and training the data on this particular ML algorithms, which we are adopting on this particular methodology, and the prediction using the result analysis. And some commonly used ML algorithms were taken into study. Okay, I have taken logistic regression. This is dealing with the various quantities of numerical and absolute factors. It is a linear regression methods we are using, and it give a binary output within a very short time. What is naive bias? Naive bias, as we all know, it is an assumption of independence among the predicting factors. It is existence of a special attribute is unrelated to the existing other feature. Decision tree, we are making a tree, depends on the characteristics. Okay, and upon using that particular data, we are came to assumption that the prediction, how much the prediction, or what is the value of a particular variable. Support vector machine, it is a classification regression high dimensional algorithm, and it will give the largest margin distance which is separated two object groups. It is a probabilistic binary.
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am, but one last minute left for presentation.
Sorry, ma'am. Ma'am.
Sorry to interrupt, but one last minute left for presentation.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. These are some literature review. These are accuracy comparison of ML algorithms, and I found that SVM works more predictive than any other methods. The problem statement is invasive methods are not reliable in this sample collection methods because it is painful, it is risky, and it cannot do in all patients. Depends on the health condition of the patient only. If it is physically down patient, we can't do invasive methods. The non-invasive methods are we can use because it are taking some blood sample from the patient. It is not a very painful and risky. The other problem is some of the tumors do not show elevated AFP level. This is a very important matter in this study. Elevated AFP, tumors are producing AFP, alpha-fetoprotein, but some tumors are still not producing AFP. So AFP could not be taken as a strong biomarker. From the studies, it is shown that. And my conclusion is that since AFP could, like AFP-L3 and all, using SVM or any other algorithm, using that we can predict the disease very fast, early detection. Okay, then the scope of this prediction is less number of biomarkers using non-invasive procedures. So we can find out or we can diagnose the disease in earlier stage using less number of biomarkers using the non-invasive procedures. These are some references, and thank you, ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
Yes. These are the outcomes or the results are only on the basis of literature review and the comparison of various techniques. Do you have any practical or implemented results of your this thing technique?
Ma'am, this is my survey paper. I'm a research scholar. This is my first presentation. And I just used Vika tool and combined all these algorithms using some biomarkers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your suggestions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kavita. Our next presentation is from systems for nurse assistants. But I guess she is not available in this session. So moving ahead with our next presenter. Our next presentation is from Mr. Salil Fernandez, and the paper title is Nayan Drishti, a revolutionary navigation, a visual aid for the visually impaired. Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Can I get a minute?
Yes.
Since this, that Salil has not joined yet, but
okay.
He's joining since his presentation is at 3:51. So.
Okay, fine.
Hello, ma'am.
No, hello.
Excuse me.
Hello. Yes.
Sorry for speaking between. Myself, Anju Pradap.
Yes, it is already, your turn. You can present the paper.
Okay. Sorry for the delay. I have been trying to join in between many times. Then later I switched to another computer and then trying. Sorry for the disturbance caused. May present?
Yes. You can start, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Ma'am, may I know whether my screen is visible? I am presenting.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Good afternoon all. Myself, Dr. Anju Pradap, and I'm here to present a small work regarding IoT-based healthcare monitoring system for assisting the nurses. It is about a study and the paper is based on the review work. The paper is made. This project work is actually based on, this paper is actually based on a project that started with the objective of doing innovation in assist system for nurses in India. In comparison with many of the developed countries, India is lacking behind in nursing informatics. Nursing informatics means the usage of information technology for assisting nursing purposes. So nursing purpose, we know in a hospital, if we take, there are inpatients and outpatients. So nurses mostly take care of the inpatients around the clock, and patients will be in different rooms, and the nurses in every floor will be having a nurses station, and from the nurses station they have to take care of the inpatients. So in that every floor will be having a group of nurses with many patients. So it is if you take, every nurse has to work with one-to-many concept for every nurse with many patients. And we know the inpatient necessities like checking the IV drip flows. It may be underflowing sometimes, so the nurse has to come and check whether it underflows. So it's a manual task. If we take, there are 10 rooms in every floor, the nurses in the station has to routinely check about the status of the IV drip. Likewise, temperature control, then giving medicines to the patients. Like different patients will be having different necessities, and each nurse has to work accordingly. Now, regarding informatics, there are a lot of advancements happened in informatics, and this informatics can be applied to the nursing tasks. Then we can be automated, which can reduce the manual tasks of the nurses. So the objective of this work is to find some of the common nursing tasks which can be automated with the help of the information technology as well as the latest advancements. So that's about the project, and using that we have done a literature review regarding what all the assistance technological advancements for assisting the nurses. And the contents of this presentation include the literature survey, and the paper is basically made on the literature survey, but we have done the project based on the paper. So regarding introduction, as I explained in the abstract, the development of the information communication technology as well as many advanced IR, Industrial Revolution 4.0 technologies like the Internet of Things can be used in the healthcare sector so that many of the tasks can be automated. Okay. So in this scenario, the quality of the treatment provided matters in many hospitals, and if you use such technologies to the nursing specific tasks, the better care can be provided by every hospital. So the main objective is to find what are the difficulties faced by the nurses and whether we can apply information technology for these difficulties. So at present, many of the nurses monitor the patient health condition at regular intervals or frequent intervals. So this is a manual task which is of repetitive nature. In this project, we plan to develop an Internet of Things based system that can continuously monitor the IV drip, the ECG, the temperature and oxygen saturation. And based on that, alert can be given to the nurses. So there are many other tasks also that can be automated. But since due to the time restriction, this particular project is done based off 4 different dimensions of the which included the IV drip, the ECG, temperature, and oxygen survey. Next, about the literature survey. So in this, the paper that I have applied mainly focused on the literature survey, that which are the literature available, the current status of the researchers done in this particular problem. Okay, so based on that, let me explain a few papers initially, later I will be doing the comparison. So design of the low-cost pulse oximetry based on Raspberry Pi. So Raspberry Pi is a mini computer, if I can take, that can be used for developing applications. That's called as Raspberry Pi. So it can be used as a handheld device. If we develop an application, the Raspberry Pi, that can be used as a handheld device like the mobile. Okay, so the design of a low-cost pulse oximetry based on the Raspberry Pi. And the advantage of this is easier design and relatively cheaper. Okay, and in this study, a red infrared LED that's directed to the fingertips and light passing through the blood vessel captured the photodiode were utilized. So the usage of electronics for identifying the pulse using the pulse oximetric techniques, and for that the device used some of the electronics components like the Raspberry Pi oximetry sensor, ICM Max 30100, Arduino Uno R3, and Tambilen LCD. Next, about the Internet of Things applied in healthcare based on open hardware with low energy consumption. So these devices need to be run with using energy only. So every researcher will be trying to find a solution for energy consumption that can lesser or make it low of the energy consumption. So the paper mainly focused on the development of the open hardware using low energy consumption technique. It's an IoT model which was developed using Bluetooth low energy devices which comply with low cost and open hardware solutions operated using HTTP request, and that used a client server as an edge device. So it mainly measures the oxygen level in the using this the electronic devices. The most significant result was to achieve energy consumption 20% lower than that of the devices in the market. Next, about the design and development of IoT-based intravenous infusion system. So the usage of IoT in IV infusion. So the authors have created a new specification for the IV bottles as well as a liquid level and drop count measurement device based on the wireless sensor network. It uses a wireless sensor network that can be that contains many devices, and using that devices that are connected, it tries to find the liquid level, and it counts the drop using drop count measurement. Okay, so the various electronic includes a Texas Instruments CC3200 and sensors like ultrasonic, HCSR04, LM335 temperature sensor, and GSM are the major components of the system. And it works under the Wi-Fi. That is a benefit, because since it works under Wi-Fi, the wired connection can be reduced. Next, about the IoT assisted ECG monitoring framework with data transmission.
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am. 1 last minute left for your presentation.
Pardon, madam?
1 last minute left for your presentation.
Oh, last minute. Okay. Sorry. So this is a summary table of the various work in 2020, which is the latest work came, design of low-cost pulse oximetry based on the Raspberry Pi, and it has it was not equipped with the battery and was not.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you have any results like of hardware results?
Hardware results, ma'am. Actually, let me see. See, these are some of the devices that we used to develop the system. It consisting of the Raspberry Pi, and it's a single Raspberry Pi that works as a mobile. As I said, you can visualize it as
you have implemented your technology using Raspberry Pi and Arduino. And did you get any results?
Yes, ma'am.
Please share those results.
So this is what I shown. In this result, you can see an ECG sensor using an Arduino is attached to a patient. So the same ECG will be transmitted to the handheld device in the nurse. Okay, so regular intervals, the data can be taken through online. That is a meaning. Online means the nurse has to be present in the nurse's station, but it is no need to go to the room, each room in every interval. So this is one result that is showing here. The other IV drip and oxygen metering is under progress only. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. No questions from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Our next presentation is from Mr. Salil Fernandez, and the paper title is Nayan Drishti, a Revolutionary Navigation Visual Aid for the Visually Impaired.
Ma'am, have you got screen sharing rights?
Yes. You can
okay.
Share your screen.
So I will give an introduction first, and then we will move on to a short video wherein everything will be explained there itself. So a very good afternoon to one and all. We, the authors of the research paper, that is Nayan Drishti, are here today to demonstrate the work that has been mentioned in our paper, as well as explain the working behind of our proposed model, which is a multifunctional system to aid the difficulties that are underprivileged disabled people face in their day-to-day lives. So without further ado, let's go to the video wherein we will have all our explanations and other stuff. So I will share the video right now. Is my screen visible?
Yes, Jordan.
Hi Salil, if you are facing technical issues, till the time we are moving ahead with our next presenter, till the time you can be ready with your video. So
Okay.
our next presentation
Okay,
is our next presentation is from Ms. And the paper title is Cloud Enabled Education as a Service Review. Hello, Ms. Tarandeep Kaur.
Hello, am I audible, everyone?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Tarandeep Kaur from School of Computer Applications, Lovely Professional University. And first of all, I want to thank the conference organizers for giving me this opportunity to present virtually in a very short period of time. So, in a quick review, I have just got 5 minutes for presenting, so I will be a little quick. So I'm going to present a paper on cloud-enabled education as a service. So this is a survey paper that we had conducted a survey on. These will be the contents of my descriptions. First of all, e-learning. We all know these days we are undergoing this pandemic situations, and most of the universities, academic sections have adopted this digital platforms for offering their learners, right? So we are undergoing this concept of digital India, right? So we are making use of learning through electronic means, right? We are actually promoting digital content. Even if we are conducting here in this conference, we are participating, we are a part of a digital platform where we are collaborating on working towards this conference on learning different kind of concepts, different kind of technologies, and knowing about them. So we are promoting an education oriented environment that is not just benefiting the students but the teachers as well, and that is through the means of internet technology. So we are making use of this web technology and the computer systems, and this is possible with the advances that have been made in the internet and multimedia technology, right? So what happens, this e-learning has bridged the gap between the learners and educators, even though beyond their geographical boundaries, right? We are connected electronically. Either we earlier we were making use of audios and videos. Now we have the multimedia communication. These days, students interact with the teachers through WhatsApp messages or other platforms as well. We have a concept of online or virtual classrooms. Smart boards are being used. But now there is a concept of cloud computing. This is not just novel concept. It has been since there in the last 15 years. But now this cloud environment is being utilized to promote the educational platforms, right? So cloud computing, all in all, it is a model that enables convenient and on-demand network access through the use of different kind of cloud computing services. Prominently, we have three main cloud services. First one is a software as a service. We are not concerned with how we need to manage the applications, the mobile applications that we use. Like software as a service, I give an example, like Facebook is there, we have WhatsApp. These are the softwares that are being provided to us as a service. We are not concerned with how they are being managed. Then we have a platform as a service. A typical example for this will be integrated development environments. Many of you might be involved in programming different kind of concepts. So might be you are using this cloud-based integrated development environments. GitHub is there. We have Amazon Cloud9 example as a platform as a service. Then we have infrastructure as a service, where we are using the infrastructure of a third-party solutions that are being provided to us. We are making use of their storage, like we have Google Drive that is being extensively used. We are using the storage of a third party, right? So we have prominently four main cloud deployment models. Like we have the public cloud that is publicly accessible. We have a private cloud that is can be confined within the boundaries of a particular organization. We have hybrid cloud that is a combination of public and private cloud. And then we have a community cloud. This community cloud is something that is concerned with a particular objective being served out for a particular community, right? So we have a concept of, when we talk about e-learning and when we talk about cloud computing, cloud provides everything as a service. So when we talk about e-learning, this is a a platform, this is a medium through which we are promoting education as a service being provided through cloud computing. So we are providing learning and development to the teachers through various electronic media such as internet, audio, video, etc. Right? We often use these terms with e-learning synonymously, education as a service and e-learning. So when I talk about education as a service model, what are the major advantages associated with this model? The major benefits of this is it has helped us in providing more accessibility beyond the geographical domains of the students, irrespective of their geographical boundaries. The next benefit is the resource scalability. So when I talk about resource scalability, the teachers are able to access different kind of resources. If I talk about Amazon Educate account, we can actually access the different kind of resources over there. Then we have self-paced learning. Now, self-paced learning is something that we have the independence. Even as a teacher, we have independence.
Sorry, ma'am, but we are running out of the time limit, so I request you to conclude the presentation.
Yes, sure, ma'am. So I will fast enough. Then we have effectiveness. The students are able to obtain certificates beyond their skills that are not just confined to 4-year degree or 5-year degree programs. Then we have active learning is being promoted out. So when we use this cloud model, it has enhanced that e-learning towards virtualized learning environment, and it has actually embellished this concept of education as a service. So there are certain benefits of cloud being used for delivering education as a service. First is we have online access to, even we have access to massive online courses, MOOCs. We have online tests that are being conducted. Then project collaborations are being done. Reporting requirements, we can analyze the performance of the students as well. Then real life simulators are being used. Right? We have a concept of smart learning that is also a part of this e-learning platform. So cloud is actually providing a smart and virtual learning environment for you. I'm little in rush. So basically there are certain benefits: learning anywhere, anytime, self-paced learning, feedback-based learning. We can adopt different kind of pedagogies for as well, right? So there are certain trends in using this major smart and virtual learning environment. We have the learning management systems. We make use of mobile-based apps for learning. We make use of collaborative learning where, if, for example, we have Google Classroom, we can collaborate on different kind of tasks. Not just students can chat live with these teachers as well. Then we have bite-sized learning that is often called as micro-learning. Micro-learning, basically, we promote small videos for learning, just 4-5 minutes on certain specific topics, right? Then we have translation of online courses. That is also with the advent that we can actually learn different courses in multiple language supports are available. So we have different kind of learning management systems, that is an integrated software package for managing and communicating the virtual processes through the internet. So this is just a comparison of different kind of learning management systems that are being extensively used these days. We have Moodle, Canvas, or Blackboard. Right? So this table lists out the comparison of these models. Then I have just surveyed certain cloud-based existing education as a service delivery models. So these table list out as survey techniques. So conclusively, as I have told, that cloud has revolutionized the education sector as well. So it has enabled provision of the provision of education as a service all in all. So this concludes out this survey paper that I have done. So these are the references. Thank you.
Yeah, ma'am, can you please share with me that slide showing different types of clouds?
Yes, ma'am. Sure. Give me 1 second. My screen is visible as yet?
Yes.
So different kind of learning management systems?
No, different types of clouds. I have a question regarding those.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, sure.
Yes, this one. I have a question in my mind that what are the end users of these different clouds, and who are the service providers of these models which you have shown for different clouds?
Yes, sure, ma'am. Basically, ma'am, in case of public cloud, like we have big IT giants like Google is there, Facebook has given us a public cloud environment. but it does not allow, there are certain limitations in that public cloud as well. You are able to use their services, but you don't have access to how they are managing it. So actually Facebook is also adopting a hybrid cloud of environment. So end users in public cloud, we as the end users are there. Private cloud has end users that are pertaining to a particular organization only. Maybe they can actually showcase certain part, they can actually showcase certain part of their cloud that is publicly available, but certain part is actually vested out to be managed or to be utilized by the people working in that organization only. So that is actually this hybrid concept was devised out, that certain aspects are related only to within an organization and certain aspects are available to the outer people, common people as well. Hello.
Anji, yes. Thank you so much. It was a nice and very informative presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Taramdit Kaur, and hello, Mr. Salil Fernandez.
Ma'am, we will continue without the audio. We will show the video and concurrently explain the whatever we have to explain. Okay?
Sure.
Okay, so
so my name
Anthony,
is...
you will take from here. Over
just
from
a minute. Don't play now.
Yeah.
So our project basically aims at building a prototype for aiding the blind and blind challenged people. So we've mainly concentrated on three major aspects. One's the object distance and sensing, one's object recognition, and one's locating a blind person. So first I'll take you through object detection. So this is the first feature of our project.
The audio still can't be heard, right?
No.
Okay, you explain.
So in this, mainly we've used an ultrasonic sensor. So what this would do, we've used a Raspberry Pi module and a Bluetooth speaker. So as you can see, the ultrasonic sensor is connected to the breadboard, which in turn is connected through a set of wires to the Raspberry Pi module. Now what we've programmed it to do is, once the ultrasonic sensor senses an object within the distance of 15 meters, now note that this distance can be adjusted as per the user's preference. So it will identify. Now you can see the readings are being shown on the monitor. Once the reading will be less than 15 meters. Now the object is placed more than 15 meters. Once the object moves below 15 meters, an alert noise will be given by the speaker saying, warning, object ahead. Now you can't hear the noise, but if the volume was there, you could hear the speaker saying, warning, obstacle ahead. So this is how we've implemented object detection so that the blind and impaired person can actually walk through without any particular fear. Second is object recognition. Now for this particular feature, we've used a Raspberry Noir camera. So specialty of this camera, it also can identify images in the dark. So if it's dark, it has the capability of having a night vision. Okay. So since we do not have, the Raspberry Pi model does not have a large memory, that's why the FPS given will be very low. Now, once we've placed the camera, we place three, for example, we've taken three particular case studies out here. First, we place a wine glass and the camera will recognize it. And in turn, connect to the Bluetooth speaker, the speaker would give an output saying wine glass detected. Now you can see a bottle. And the camera shall recognize the bottle in front of it. As you can see, the box highlighted in white says bottle, and there'll be a score adjacent to it saying how much of its percentage is recognized it's a bottle. And second case was a teacup. Following that, we tried with the wine glass. And lastly, with a person itself. Now coming to final feature, the GPS navigation. So first we've used a u-blox geochip that will actually connect with the satellite above and give you the location. So what this particular thing will do is actually give you the latitude and longitude of your current location, but not the current address. So we've used a reverse geocoding code that will actually take this latitude, longitude and give you the exact address. And not only that, this particular address that will be given me will be lively updated in the Firebase cloud, so that if any person required needs to find the blind person, he can easily access the cloud and find the location of the blind person. So once we run the code, so all the outputs will be given by the Bluetooth speaker. So not only to be found by the blind, responsible person, but also to give the output to the blind person where he is and where his surroundings are. So that's a chip that we use, the GPS navigation chip. So initial coding would give you lateral longitude, but using reverse geocoding, it will give you the correct address. For example, if I'm in Bandra, it will give you Bandra West and the surrounding street and etc. Now, as you can see, this is the Firebase cloud, where database, where you can see the location being lively updated on a timely basis whenever the GPS function is run. So that's a brief of our project. The 3 main features that we plan to implement that we thought would be essential for a blind person. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
First of all, I would appreciate you both that despite of this technical glitch, you demonstrated your idea and the technique in a very good manner. I appreciate you. And
Thank you so much,
yeah, like it was good. It was good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mr. Salil Fernandez. And we are done for our presentation today. So going ahead with our remarks, I sincerely thank our authors for their excellent presentation and contribution to this session, and all other participants to join the session and the international conference. I hope this session was informative enough. All the presenters would be getting their digital certificates within 2 working days. Further, all the papers have already been forwarded to the publication, the Springer, and publication will be live in 5 to 6 months. So kindly cooperate with the team of ICT4SD 2021. Also, I thank our session chair for chairing the session, and a token of appreciation from the team ICT4SD and Global Knowledge Research Foundation. Thank you so much, Dr. Pallavi, for joining the session and chairing the session.
Nilima, thank you so much. Thanks to you and to the organizers. And thanks to all the authors and presenters. It was a very nice, informative session. And I really enjoyed the session, chairing this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Also, I request you all to on the camera so I can have a quick snapshot for our virtual conference.
Hi, Neelam. I'm sorry, my camera doesn't function well. Let's see if you can see me.
Yes.
No, it's a black screen. So sorry about that.
You are visible. No worries.
Let me
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
So can we leave now, Neelam?
Yes. Thank you. Ending the session, and thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe. Take care.